All right, good morning, Doug. We're back with questions from members of the File. Files are a private community available to crisis investing subscribers. If you're interested, go to crisisinvesting.com. First, Doug, this day in history.
Okay, this day in history. I've got three things that are worth talking about, I think. Number one is in 1901, it was on this day that William McKinley was shot. A couple interesting things about that. He was shot by a self-styled anarchist. Uh, can't remember his name, but it's unimportant. Uh, as far as McKinley is concerned, he was a pretty disastrous president because he started uh, America on the road to becoming a foreign empire with the Philippines and the Spanish-American War and so forth. So I'd say kind of good riddance. I'm not a fan of McKinley, but on the other hand, he was killed by an anarchist, so-called. Anyway, this was in the time anarchism. There are two strands of anarchism that confuse people. One is the American strand, which is the free market strand. People like Lysander Spooner, for instance. And then there's the European strand, which is the violent strand. That would be people like Bakunin and Prokotkin. Both of them hate the state. The European strand hates the state. Like, I love reading the stuff that especially Bakunin wrote about how terrible and unjust and we don't need the state. It was, I mean, wonderful stuff. But he doesn't understand the economics. He wanted socialism, but if you have socialism, you've got to have a big state. So it's kind of a bifurcation in the brain of these European anarchists, most of whom are violent. On the other hand, American anarchists don't believe in the state, the government, but they're completely nonviolent. And of course, that's the strain that we belong to. But it confuses a lot of people. And incidentally, it was after that McKinley assassination, I think it was the main impetus of many countries made it a law that anarchists couldn't be granted visas, were not allowed in the country, et cetera, because they were deemed as being really dangerous. And
Hmm.
that's still on the books today. And I wonder sometimes if when I go to some country that has that on the books and they say, you've declared yourself as an anarchist, you're in a world of trouble, blah, blah, blah. So
Hmm.
anyway, I think those are the important things to know about William McKinley. Good riddance, but too bad about who did it. The other thing is 1522, uh, Magellan's ship. I can't remember what that was called.
The Victoria.
The Victoria returns to Spain after completing an around the world trip. Uh, so that's really pretty spectacular on Magellan's part. I mean, we're talking only 30 years after Columbus discovers the New World. Magellan sails around the world, although he didn't make it the whole way because he arrived, I think it was in the Philippines, and they had a dust up with the natives, and Magellan got killed.
Hmm.
So anyway, keeping things in perspective, only 30 years after Columbus determined what was out there, Magellan sails around or his ship sails around the world anyway. I think that's important. Only 30 years. I mean, progress was fast even those days, I guess,
Hmm.
even the speed of sail. And the last thing is, it was on this day in 1972 that the Munich massacre took place at the Olympics, where some Mohammedan radicals killed, what, 7 or 8 or 9 Israeli athletes.
Yeah, there was nine. Nine.
Right. Well, I'm not a fan of Islam, as we know, and I don't want to go off on another diatribe on Islam, but it's a violent so-called religion. It's it's in the warp and woof of Islam. that it's wants to conquer. It hates Jews, hates Christians, but doesn't actually hate Jews and Christians as much as it hates other people who are non-believers. At least Jews and Christians are so-called people of the book. Anyway, Islam is advancing on all fronts, and that's a very, very bad thing if you value individuality and personal freedom and things of this nature. Anyway, so it's
I think it's worth mentioning on that note, we have a couple of, well, we have several Muslim viewers who comment and send us emails or send me emails at least regularly, some of which I forwarded to you. And one of them sent me just yesterday a video of is he Irish or Scottish? I think he's Scottish guy who's 21 years old who has converted to Islam and was explaining why he did. This is just white kid and explaining, the decadence and the just just the just all the nasty things about what Western society looks like today. And he looks at in his view, you look at Islam and you go, at least there's some good things about it, and so he converted and he's sent me that video and the guy, this 21-year-old kid, but made a compelling case for why it was better. He really
I understand, and I'm very sympathetic because this 21-year-old kid obviously doesn't believe or didn't believe in anything and was looking for something to grasp onto, something to believe in, to show that life has meaning. And Islam's very good for that. So it's understandable. But Islam as a philosophy, it's fatally flawed, but perhaps people in general are fatally flawed.
and
So,
and the seed of whatever is dominating Western civilization, and well, eating out Western civilization from the inside is more flawed, I think, than Islam at this stage. Not what Western civilization was, but what it means to this kid is worse. So when you compare the two to him, he goes, "This looks better, much better."
of course, all he sees around him is corruption and stupidity, and yeah, he's looking for something, and I think he's found the wrong answer, totally wrong answer. And in case I have listen, Mohammedans or Muslims, as they prefer to be called, as individuals they're as good as any other people. I mean, they're very nice on an individual basis, but when it comes to the religion, that comes first in their lives. And if you're not a Muslim, even though they can accept you as individuals and you can party and talk and all this type of thing, you will be thrown off the troika and perhaps beheaded. I mean, it's a violent philosophy, even though it's got nice aspects. I mean, Sir Richard Burton. I don't mean the actor. I mean the 19th century explorer. Uh, he's a real favorite of mine in many ways, and he investigated Islam very, very thoroughly. I mean, I've looked into it not nearly as thoroughly as he did because, after all, it was said that he spoke 10 languages fluently and 15 more reasonably well, which I think is
Amazing.
make that distinction. And of course, Arabic was one of them, and he read the Quran in the original and so forth. I've read the Quran in English. I recommend everybody read the Quran. I think that H.L. Mencken was quite correct when he said it's really like a dog down on all fours barking. Uh, it's true. I mean, the amount of just thoroughly objectionable and actually evil pronouncements in the Quran, and you can forget about the hadith of Islam with the actions and sayings of Muhammad and his associates. I mean, but it gives you something to believe in, and it has some nice aspects. You get together and you worship together. It gives you a sense of camaraderie, sense of purpose in life.
And there are some honorable individual elements, right, in terms of individual conduct. which like it said, you know what I mean, where it says like to not
Not
uh yeah, to not steal, to not, it says to not drink or not to become a dullard essentially, right? To, you know, by intoxication. And so when a 21-year-old sees a bunch of degenerates around him, his peers, you can see why like young men want honor. And so like it's very like that base level appearance, I think, is compelling to them. I
Yeah, he's looking to improve himself and straight. So I hope he discards it along the way, but can't argue with why he might have done it in today's world.
yeah.
Anyway, talking about degenerates, that brings us naturally to Kamala Harris. But wait a minute, we talked the last time about, is it Kamala or what is it? I can't remember the way that she prefers for it to be pronounced. But this kind of led me to looking at, well, how can you pronounce Kamala or I really don't. I can't remember how she pronounced it or how her stepdaughters were told to pronounce it at the convention or wherever her stepdaughters pronounced it correctly. But I've got four separate pronunciations for it here. They're very confusing. Three are in Spanish, and the last one is a Trumpism. And the first one is Kamala. And in Spanish, that means how bad. So maybe she should pronounce it Kamala. Or if you want, you could pronounce it in Spanish again, Kamala, which means burn her. So maybe she should say
I don't think
Kamala.
she'd use that one.
That's a good one. And then the last one, just came up with this one. It's kind of the most obvious in some ways, is come, and that means bed her. And that's kind of appropriate because Kamala's kind of a notorious and outrageous hoe. So take your choice. And then the last one, this is a Trumpism. He says commie law because she's a commie. So, I mean, I hate to contradict her two fine stepdaughters, but there are at least four other appropriate pronunciations of her name.
Yeah, it's we have a Finnish viewer said, well, check out what her name is in Finnish. And the same spelling, I'm not sure what the pronunciation would be, but it means horrible.
That's fine too. Well, perhaps we have some listeners that can tell us what Kamala or whatever these means in different languages. So
It's pretty interesting.
it
Yeah,
is.
and don't tell us about the lotus part. We know that. We understand the lotus reference
Yes.
or in the Indian languages, but tell us the non-obvious stuff. That's more entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah. Much more fun.
Okay, well, let's get to some of these questions, Doug. First one is, I've recently been made aware of the concept of the election industrial complex. It says this multi-billion-dollar industry appears hidden in plain sight until an honest label was assigned. Is Doug familiar with this term?
Uh, I wasn't familiar with that term, but I think it's probably a pretty good one because with the government controlling almost everything economic, everything big, well, small, everything economic in the US, it's important that you elect people that will pass the laws and the regulations and the taxes and controls that favor you as opposed to anybody else. So no wonder billions are spent getting the person that favors what you want at the expense of others. So yeah, the election industrial, yeah, absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I think he's also just all of the infrastructure for elections, just that has become a giant grift along with so many other grifts today. You know, like the companies that supply the voting machines or the software or the consultants, and you know, just like that's a whole industry in of itself. Just the around voting, you know, and that's a whole new lobby that's emerged where they have all these different people that have positioned themselves to get turn off the grift of making sure equal opportunity for voters and you know managing that whole process. It's another grift. It reminds me of, I mean, I think we live in the grifter economy where you know the migration thing. I mean, there's so many people involved. We've discussed this before, in the migration grift from the churches that benefit from providing temporary shelter to the religious and other NGO organizations that help manage all the logistics for everybody along the way. I mean, it's
Yeah, our elected officials with the election grift put in office, and then they take hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars and throw it at the people in these grifting organizations, from churches to NGOs to companies to God knows what. Just give them the people's money and they all become wealthy. Yeah, it's actually quite criminal. It is a grift, the whole thing.
the whole thing. Yep,
Collapse.
it will collapse. Okay. Someone asked about worried about a government rug pulls on mining assets. I mean, there are nation states that are getting more aggressive with mines and other assets like that. We know about there's the situation with um, uh, the Poliquin family and some of their assets in Mexico, for instance. You know, we have the natives complaining about it, and you know, the shutdown of the mine, the First Quantum's mine in Panama was another one.
Yeah.
Anyway, recently Zambia made a move on Midnight Sun's copper claim. So, what are your thoughts generally on the state's moves toward these assets, and then specifically with Midnight Sun?
Well, as I've emphasized many times in the past, mining is a crappy, ridiculous business. And I'm not going to go into all the reasons why that's true. Uh, that said, mining can be an excellent place to make money. And Midnight Sun, where we made file members aware of a private placement that the company did almost 3 months ago.
I was in May. In May.
Almost. Yeah. And it was at 22 cents with a 30-cent warrant, as I recall. Stock ran up to 60 cents. Uh, and then because of a clerical error, that's what I'll call it, on the part of the Zambian government, it looked like the Zambians were taking away one of their assets, relatively minor, but very profitable asset, and giving it to a Chinese company. Well, it was a clerical error, and this is being rectified. Stock is, at last I looked, about 27 cents. What do I think? Answer the question without getting into the weeds too much about the story on Midnight Sun. I have quite a large position in Midnight Sun, and I think that stock is, in today's world, as good a shot, despite the fact it's in Zambia, which has actually many advantages over North America at this point. I think it's a sure thing for a 10 to 1 and maybe much more. So unlike most private placements that I do, I think I'm going to keep my stock as well as the warrant. And if you don't own any, I think it's a very good speculation if you can buy it I think it's still at 27 cents or something like that. I think
Yeah, and
it's,
you're quoting the Canadian price, and there's a US tracking stock on it that's lower price than that currently,
oh
based for
yeah,
you.
because Canadian dollars are 74 cents US at the moment. So at 27 cents Canadian, yeah, I think it's a 10 to 1 shot, probably over the next year or two. That's a hell of a prediction.
That is a hell of a prediction. And even if they did lose access to that part of their property, I think that your basic thesis about a 10 to 1 is still even true, which they just doesn't appear that they did lose. But we'll, you know,
No, no, I don't think they did. It was actually a very stupid clerical error, which the bureaucracy took a while, but they are going to straighten it out. So fear not about that. And we have a few others that are on the way. So
it's a good reason to join Crisis Investing. If you want to join as VIP and you hear about these private placement deals, if you're an accredited investor, they could work out well for you. Um, let's see. Next question, Doug, is he says, his girlfriend and he are planning a visit to Argentina near the end of the year, and they have a few destinations that they want to check out. You've spoken on a few cities already. What are your thoughts on Bariloche? Um, And he says, as far as the internet goes, it seems like an incredible place, and I'm potentially looking to buy real estate there as a backup plan. What do you think?
I like Bariloche. It's not a town, it's a city of a couple 100,000 at least. And Bariloche is in the Andes. It's a ski resort, among other things. Uh, Very nice. It's kind of most famous within Argentina as a place where college kids like to go to party or whatever. It's a
Hmm.
nice kind of town or small city. So yeah, definitely and it's beautiful. Has all the facilities. Of course, I'm a fan of a much smaller town, Cafajate, which you ought to also visit. And if you drive about, I think, 3 hours by road south from Bariloche, you will go to the town of San Martin de los Andes, which looks like a town in Bavaria. A little German town is what it looks like. And I just love that place. It's on the lakes with the mountains there and a great ski resort. And it's fantastic. So go to San Martin de los Andes, small town, 20, 30,000 people at most. Where else would I go? I'd go to Mendoza. Mendoza is great. It's the wine country of Argentina. Uh, there's all kinds of great places in Argentina. I mean, the first thing I was going to buy in Argentina was actually close to the town of Necochea, which is in the south of, it is in the south of BA province, and it's on the ocean. Because don't forget, Argentina's got what, a couple thousand miles of ocean front.
Coastline.
Yeah, so it's pretty fantastic. Everybody wants a place on the ocean. The problem is that it's cold. It's not like, beachy
Yeah.
ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that starts in Uruguay and gets much better in Brazil. So, yeah, I totally agree. You're in the right place at the right time.
All right. Next question. Somebody wants to know, one of our file members asked if it would be okay if he created some bootleg t-shirts of this image. If you can see it here.
Yeah. Well, that's very flattering. Uh, and who am I to not want to build the cult of the personality? So, sure, go ahead. I mean, that's that's fine.
I told him if he did, I'd be happy to buy some. So,
Yeah, and I'd like a complimentary copy, frankly. That'd be great.
all right. Next question. He says it would be interesting to hear Doug's take on the best, he's looking for a somewhat realistic best case scenario for the US. He said, we know nobody is going to come up with a Malays chainsaw and gut the programs or abolish the three-letter agencies. But might Trump, if he were allowed to win, be able to cut regulation and print just enough dollars to keep the snowball rolling and not hit the wall in the next few years? In other words, what do you think Trump could do to ensure things don't fall apart on his watch? And could it work temporarily? Like, could we have like a reprieve like we did financial crisis? We thought that was the end. We ended up getting another dozen years out of that. Is it possible we get that could happen again?
Yes, I think it's possible. First of all, Trump has got to win. And I don't think that's by any means assured for a number of reasons we don't need to go into right now. But let's hope against hope that Trump wins. And what will he do? He's got no understanding of economics. So he'll continue borrowing and printing. And I mean, for instance, he wants to have a national sovereign fund. Uh, he envisions having many billions or hundreds of billions of dollars in, like Norway and Saudi Arabia and some other place, a couple other places actually have. But the U.S. government's bankrupt, for God's sake. How can they build a sovereign fund when they're bankrupt to the tune of many, many trillions of dollars? But he gets these ideas about that. But if he's in office, he's not going to root out, I don't think, any of these agencies, the Department of Education, Department of Energy, dozens of them. They should be abolished and their employees fired and Agent Orange sowing on the ground where they grew. He's not going to do that, but he'll cut them back, which is good. But then again, it's not good because it leaves the door. It's like pruning a tree. It grows back stronger. And when the Democrats are reelected, they'll hire all these horrible people back, and he'll cut taxes. He's a businessman. He understands that, but he'll print up money to make up the larger deficit. I was on a call with my friend David Stockman the other day, and David is a numbers guy. He's a wonk. That's really what he is, because he used to be run the office of OMB, Management and Budget for the U.S. government under Reagan. And it turns out that I think I said that 80% of the U.S. government's budget is kind of written in stone. You can't change it. No, I was wrong. It's over 91% of what the U.S. government spends is written in stone. How? Well, first of all, that's the current number, but there's interest, and the amount of debt is going up, therefore interest, and I think rates are going way up. So you've got interest, which can't be not paid. Trump has said, forget about Kamala. Trump has said that he's not going to cut back on Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and some other kind of welfare program with huge. This is the majority of the U.S. budget, welfare, right? We're not going to cut that back. And then you got the military, which is he wants to have a bigger military budget, which is just a welfare program for companies like the Grumman, Raytheon.
Lockheed.
Yeah, Lockheed. That's right. There used to be 30 of them. Now they're consolidated into 5. And so and they're all building shit that is going to be useless in World War III. So it's a complete waste. But so yeah, I hope, but he'll deregulate in other ways around the edges and cut direct taxes. But he'll be doing MMT in the meantime, which hopefully will keep the stock market up there. All this. Yeah, the answer to the question, yeah, I think he might be able to keep the ball rolling, barring World War III, of course, for another 4 years.
I saw a stat today that said that the interest on the debt is now $3 billion a day is what it costs us.
Mm, yeah. And interest rates, I think, can only go up. And I've told my favorite financial joke about interest, but I don't want to go over long, and I'll save that for another time for you. Oh, I know there was something else I forgot. When we were talking about Midnight Sun, their deposit is mostly malachite, very different from the low-grade porphyries, which take billions of dollars of upfront capital, and they're a nightmare because they're so low grade. This is malachite. I got this in Zambia. Let's see if you can see this. Do you see this?
Yes.
Yeah, this thing weighs a ton because it's solid malachite. It's an ashtray that was carved. I got this in Katanga in the Congo. And then I've got some native copper over here. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
And this is a great example. I don't know where I got that, but someplace in Africa, Congo or Zambia, and weighs a ton too. And that is what most of Midnight Sun's deposit is. And it's on the surface, it's high grade, and this is what the stuff looks like. So anyway, I forgot to mention that when we were talking about Midnight Sun.
All right. So let's see. How big of a risk is it to have a second passport in a dollarized country? This is an American who got his passport by descent from Ecuador, but they also use the U.S. dollar as they don't print their own currency. Is there a greater risk than he might have if his second passport was for a non-dollarized economy?
I don't see what it might be. No, I don't think there's any risk at all, quite frankly, just because the country is dollarized. No, because there's like 50 countries around the world that use the dollar as a de facto, if not a de jure, which Panama and I guess Ecuador and I think Liberia also uses it as the de jure currency. So now don't worry about that. And another nice thing, I don't know if the Ecuadorian passport gives you a great deal of visa-free travel. I don't know. You can look it up easily. But one thing you can probably do, because most of the South American countries have an arrangement with Spain, where if you're a native born, at least uh, citizen, you can also get a Spanish passport, which is very valuable. So do that. Don't miss that trick now that you've got your Ecuadorian document.
It's a good idea. That's a good suggestion. Okay. Next, he says corporate media uses clever tactics to program people. He said they never talk about policy, but instead they focus on demonizing people who promote certain policies that they are at odds with. So person A is a bad person, so you simply don't listen to them because you don't like them. You like us, the media says. So then memorize how we tell you to think. So, what if someone important to you has been programmed by such a show, like something like Morning Joe, for example? You can't talk policy or reason because you can't convince a person with your reason when they didn't arrive at their positions by using reason. He says, is there a realistic and positive way to deprogram them from the mountains of lies, or is all hope lost? In this demonizing thing, it's just like, Trump is Hitler. There's at least a third of America that really believes that's what he is, and it doesn't really matter about the details.
No. Minimal hope. And it's a lot like if somebody really believes in their religion, it's a very tough road to try to reason them out of whatever religion they have. So the only hope, it's a psychological thing with politics like this. It's a spiritual thing, actually, like religion. These belief systems. I think the only way that there's any hope for these people is the Socratic method. In other words, don't get angry with them. Don't call them stupid. Just ask them questions about, what do you think about this? Or how would this work? Or can you explain this a little bit better? In a sense, as sincere as you can be about these things, and let the person reason himself and see if there's any cognitive dissonance that occurs to him with that. This can happen. One of my favorite people is Walter Block, who's a PhD economist, professor at Loyola in New Orleans. And he was a classmate of Bernie Sanders. They were good buddies on the track team together. And they were all Jews in Brooklyn that were all socialists or communists, all of them, all their friends, including Walter. But eventually, he started thinking this out and became a free market anarcho-capitalist economist. It can happen. And I think the best way, but it's unlikely, the best way to approach it is, as I said, the Socratic method in the way that I explained.
Yeah, you have to make them aware of their internal contradictions in a way that where they aren't on the defensive. And that's only by asking them questions. Where they
Yeah.
realize this doesn't make sense. They have to come to that conclusion themselves. They go, that doesn't make sense, but only in their own head.
And once in a while, throw in a Marxist term to show that you're not completely ignorant. And internal contradictions is a Marxist term.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why I used it. Okay, let's see. Next thing is Viktor Orban mentioned recently. He says, although it's been memory hold, that the purpose of mass migration is to break the nation state and usher in global government. And I actually have this short video from Viktor Orban. Maybe if you give me a second, I'll show it. 1 second. Make sure it's ready to go. It's worth seeing. Here we go.
I do remember how Mr. George Soros published his plan in English in a Project Syndicate publication. It was done 2015, September 26. And he published a plan. He said that he is my, I'm quoting, here are the 6 components of my comprehensive plan. I just quote 2 or 3 points of that. First is, he says very clearly, 2015, that, quoting again, EU has to accept at least 1 million asylum seekers annually. That was the first point. Second, he said, adequate financing is critical. And he proposed to issue long-term euro bonds for financing the migration crisis and the migrants' social and welfare taking care when they arrive to the European Union. And another point which is very important for Hungary, which is involving the territory of Hungary directly into this program, he said that, quoting them, safe channels must be established for asylum seekers, starting with getting them from Greece and Italy to their destination countries, which means to bring them to Greece, to Hungary, and then have them to go to Austria. So don't forget that what we are speaking about is not an accidental stories, not a bulk of 10 years of accidental stories. It's a plan which is going on. It was written, it was published, it's known. So we are fighting again an organized gang called Empire of George Soros, NGOs, who are just supporting everybody who is transgressing our legal system and our regulation, and financing illegal activity against our nation. So this is why the story is not just about migration, but it's about how this European Union is working and how George Soros was able to captive the main positions inside many institutions of European Union, buying out MPs and other leaders, and in order to execute the plan which is written, and it's against all the Christian and nation-based political forces. It's against us. It's about how to change Europe and how to eliminate and push aside all the Christian, conservative, national-based political leaders and voters from the European Union decision-making bodies. So this is the migration about, not just about migration. Sorry for it.
All right. So the question is, could mass migration be the vector to break the Westphalian system?
Well, Orban impresses me as a decent human being. He's not a free market guy. I mean, he's all for welfare and regulations and all that within Hungary. Probably not, couldn't possibly be as bad as other European leaders, but he understands, or maybe he doesn't, that there's nothing wrong with Hungary, which has about 10 million people, I think, that 10 million Nigerian migrants can't cure. That'll start things out in Hungary, and create. So he wants to forestall that kind of chaos, because 10 million migrants from Africa is absolutely nothing. You're going to have potentially scores of millions of people and scores of millions of people from the Middle East as well. So yeah, you can't. If you value your civilization, you can't let it happen. It's insane. So he's quite right. Westphalia, okay, at the end of the 30 Years' War, which was just unbelievably brutal, it was mass murder, kind of. All these parties got together and kind of made the nation state with its borders sacrosanct, and the government, and kind of set up the current political system. And of course, if you have millions or tens of millions, forget about hundreds of millions of migrants from the third world, well, you can forget about the old borders and old customs and all this type of thing. I don't care about Westphalia because I don't believe in national borders. I believe in cultural borders, if you would. But I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Do you think that it's intentional to destroy that system, the Westphalian system?
Yeah, I think it is, frankly, because these people, that the worldwide elite that all think the same way, they're educated the same way, they have the same interests. They want what's good for them, which is lots more power and lots more money, where society is basically broken down from largely middle class, at least in Europe and North America, to an upper class and a lower class. Well, like it was before capitalism and the Industrial Revolution changed things starting in the 1500s. Yeah, they'd like to go back to that. It was pretty sweet if you were an elite person in those days. You hated the middle class back then. You liked the peasants who did what they were told and were ignorant and would work for pennies. Yeah. These are evil people as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely, if there's one thing that you can see happening around the world, at least in the West, is the destruction of the middle class. Like
Yeah.
that's the one obvious characteristic everywhere you go. I mean, just talk about last time your friend's son and the cost of living. They was trying to, I don't know if you remember that. You were explaining he's renting and wants to buy a
Yeah.
house and the
Yeah.
cost of that. And it's just so outrageous now. I mean, it's the middle class is definitely being gutted right now.
A lot of people in his position are going to say, this is undoable if the government offers him an apartment and yeah, maybe say, yeah, I'll do it. I'll vote for somebody that'll offer me an apartment. And that's
Exactly.
all over.
It's all over. All right. Just a few more questions for you, Doug. Do you think anyone will still build reliable, large V8s, V10s, or V12 vehicles in the future with great sound and excellent driving dynamics? And if not, what will happen to the value of these vehicles? Will cars of the future likely last 30 plus years if properly maintained?
Yes, they will. And they're already collectibles. I mean, against all odds, you can't buy a new Ferrari today for practical purposes. I mean, they're spoken for, and you have to be vetted, actually, in most cases, before you buy a Ferrari. They won't let you buy it unless you're one of the cognoscenti. Uh, so, yeah, these are collectibles. They're works of art. Will you be able to drive them on the street in the future? Because, of course, California and a number of other states have said no internal combustion engine cars can be sold after 2030, or which is only 6 years from now, or 2035, 11 years from now. And countries in Europe are thinking that. So this is a guess as far as what's going to be the state of the world economy and so forth. Uh, I wouldn't buy these exotic cars, such as you mentioned, uh, as an investment today because I think they're overpriced. And eventually, I think they'll be worth a lot of money because they're fun and they're beautiful and so forth. But I think the next stage for them is to be what happened to Duesenbergs and Cords and things like that from the 20s. They spent after the Depression and World War II, they spent 10 or 20 years in barns with birds nesting under the hood and that type of thing. Same thing will happen, and then they'll have a renaissance and be worth a huge amount of money again.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't buy one now unless you want to, unless you're in a position that you can treat it as a fun consumer good and you don't care about the money.
Right. Consumer good.
Yeah, consumer good, not an investment. And that's one of the problems with that market is that there are a lot of people treating these cars, especially Ferraris, but there are a lot of others like Bugattis and as investments, not as fun cars to drive.
Hmm.
I mean, look, I had several Cobras back in the 60s, and today any Cobra is worth upwards of $1 million, maybe $2 million. Back then, we just they were just used cars. That's all. They were like they were like MGs or Triumphs, but with a bigger engine and better looking and better handling. I wish I still had those cars, but oh well.
All right. Doug, have you read any of, or even, are you even familiar with Whitney Webb? Do you know who she is?
Heard the name. I'm not familiar though, really.
She's a young independent journalist, lives in Chile somewhere, American. apparently son of lawyers, and she's very, very diligent, and she does a lot of research anyway. But he's asking if you read her book, One Nation Under Blackmail. I have them here actually. They're very dense, and it's 2 volumes. This one book, 2 volumes. She goes into the history of financial and sexual blackmail operations being run by the mafia, FBI, and CIA, going basically through the 20th century. It's very well documented, and at the end, it gets to this, or I guess the volume 2, which I didn't read. I read the first one. It gets into Jeffrey Epstein and his role and his involvement in these operations. And she makes the assertion that the majority of lawmakers in the U.S. and elsewhere are likely controlled, willingly or unwillingly at this point by by this mafia, essentially. And she's long question. I'm setting it up, but so one of the prominent blackmail artists discussed in Webb's book is Roy Cohn, the Jewish mafia lawyer and political fixer from New York. And many accounts say that Donald Trump was mentored by him and may have learned the dark arts of blackmail from Cohn himself. So knowing how the game works, Trump has avoided many of the pitfalls. He doesn't drink. He apparently doesn't use email. He has ties to Epstein, but there's nothing credible linking him to Epstein's sex trafficking. He is a philanderer, but that's not a crime. So the question is, he says, I'm not a big fan of Trump, but one thing seems to explain the bureaucracy's reaction to him. They don't have anything on him. They can't be controlled. So he can't be allowed to assume power. What are your thoughts on this? Like maybe that's because if they have compromise on everybody, but maybe they don't on him.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, that's a very good point that she makes, I think. And the other thing is that uh, unless somebody is clean as the driven snow, there's going to be compromise on all these politicians and so forth. So they'll do what they're told, or their lives and fortunes and families will be ruined.
Right. And they have so many levers they can pull along the way, I mean, to try and bait people in, just a tiny little thing, but then they use that to get a bigger thing, later on them. So
yeah.
Yeah, Jade and I just finished watching that series on Netflix. Finally, House of Cards. I don't know if you ever saw that, but Kevin Spacey.
I loved that. It was great. It was great.
And in that there were, I mean, everybody was compromised, one way or another.
Yeah. And one thing about that series is that, look, so Kevin Spacey turned out to be a homosexual predator that was coming on to other men. Well, so what? I mean, if somebody comes on to you, an aggressive homo, it, I mean, why is that a reason to fire him? He's a great actor. I mean,
Yeah.
if he's too aggressive, you got to smack him. But instead, apparently somebody ratted him out as the whole society's degraded at this point.
Right. If he does something, if he's physical with you, like that's a crime called assault, and he could be charged with that. But like if he's just, you know,
Yeah. No, he was great in that role. He's a great actor generally. So the series didn't end quite as the way it would have if Spacey had been fired for whatever harassment or whatever it was.
yeah, he kind of got the Me Too backlash. It was kind of on the tail end of that in reverse, I guess.
Yeah, but all these people are compromised. I mean, that's what the FBI and the CIA do for a living, is dig up dirt on people, and the NSA, of course, anything electronic. So
Right.
these are horrible, dangerous agencies. They control the government.
I think that's definitely true. Okay, so last question. What does Doug think would happen to the price of gold and other precious metals or stores of value in general if the Bitcoin blockchain were hacked? And by extension, the wider crypto coins were also compromised, rendering them almost worthless and useless. He says, I'm also thinking it would cause the stock market to wobble quite a bit too. Well, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not a computer guy. That's an understatement, but I do try to keep up with the science behind this. And quantum computing is a reality now. And it's so powerful that perhaps they can hack Bitcoin and other coins so that it's a danger. Don't have to worry about that so much with gold. So
Do you think that, do you think,
gold goes up if that happens, I think.
do you think it would happen? Okay. Yeah. Because what I guess Bitcoin's worth like $1 trillion is the market cap on it. And so if that disappeared overnight, do you think that, because if people realized it was compromised, then it would lose value tremendously as people tried to get rid of it, in advance of it? Would that cause liquidity problems in the market that might cause temporarily things to go down? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. When you phrase it that way, Matt, that's $1 trillion of a current asset that would disappear, would die and go to money heaven. So, and the thing is that people that own Bitcoin are generally pretty friendly towards gold for pretty much the same reasons. So they'd be hurt too. And that might put some selling pressure on gold because they might have to liquidate some gold to meet obligations that they were using for the Bitcoin market. Uh, but at the same time, gold would be the only alternative if you want privacy and safety. Good question. I don't know what the real answer is.
And there are a lot of people that argue that gold would be a lot higher today if Bitcoin didn't exist. If there wasn't an alternative that kind of met the same standard. So,
Well, of course, that's true, but you can make another argument. It's that Bitcoin really drew people's attention to the fact that the dollar is a fiat currency. And for the first time, the average guy that knows anything about Bitcoin started calling the dollar fiat, which only gold bugs did before.
yeah.
So it kind of introduced people to the whole concept of sound money through Bitcoin that people weren't listening to with gold. So it's a couple arguments both ways.
Yeah, and it's done more for the philosophy of sound money than gold did in my lifetime. But
Yeah,
it really did. I
I think
mean,
so. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's all we've got for today, Doug. We'll wrap it up here, and I guess we'll be back next week.
Unless World War III starts. I don't know of anything in particular that's looming over us this particular weekend, but you never know. We're dealing with crazy people.
We absolutely are. We're at the point where anything can happen. No doubt
Yeah.
about it. All right. Thanks, Doug.
See you then, Matt.